rarely do we ever move the fork up and down on the triple clamp or raise the ride height in the shock unless you're looking for something specific, because it's always a give and take. There's never going to be, this is the setup. It's perfect everywhere, every corner, every time. Doesn't work that way.
You mentioned moving the forks in shock length and stuff. So you're talking geometry changes.
Geometry, yes, right? Sorry, yes.
Because every bike from the factory has a certain setting where it's at. The forks are set here. The shock is this length, that kind of thing. But oftentimes, what becomes the common setup for that particular bike for track riding isn't quite what comes off the showroom. It's a little taller fork, it's a little shorter shock, or something like that.
Sure, right.
When riders are kind of coming up with what is that sort of standard setting, is that just through sheer like time on the seat and working with a tuner like you, and people kind of go, hey, this bike tends to like a slightly higher front end or a lower front end, and vice versa? Or how do you guys go about coming up with that?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like just say for a number, fork height, the way most national teams measure a fork height is from the top of the bottom triple clamp to the axle center. That with the front tire off the ground, like on a pin stand, right? The front tire's fully floating and be able to spin. Average bike usually is like 530 millimeters, okay? Which is, doesn't matter if it's a ZX6R, an R6, R1, ZX10, they're all right in that range. Unless you have some specific bikes like a Ducati V2, it likes to be at like 490 to 495, somewhere in that range. But you learn that kind of stuff just through experience, right? And working with that team. And again, you have these programs that are out there. It's like, oh yeah, my rake and trail and this number, it has to be this number. Well, you know as well as I do, if you scoot back or lean forward, all those numbers are going to go right out the window, right? So you have to look at the averages. And again, what the rider wants that bike to do, what racetrack you're at, where you're at on the street. I ask people, are you a commuter? Or you just ride on the weekends, Canyon Warrior, whatever, or track day guys. So you have to make it more compliant and more forgiving for them so they enjoy their motorcycles. If they don't enjoy their motorcycles, then we're all out of a job, right? I mean, that's
well, one of the things that we see because Dave and I get a lot of new track riders. There's our first time track riders that come out a lot of times. And they'll come with whatever kind of baggage that they come with, right? So they've heard from their buddy, or they read it on Reddit or whatever it was. I've seen several bikes that showed up for a track rider, and for no other reason other than the internet told them to, they have lowered the front end, meaning the fork tubes are slid up in the triple clamp to lower the front end, because that's sporty. That's a more sporty
look.
setup.
Yeah,
it looks the way they think it should. Can you talk a little bit about some of these sort of generalities like that, and where that kind of goes wrong for riders?
Well, most manufacturers, when they make a bike, remember, they are building a street bike. I mean, granted, you can go out and buy a $45,000 Ducati V4R, right? Which is obviously designed for the track, or a M1000 BMW. But still, at the end of the day, it is still a street bike. It still has to go in a parking lot. It still has to be quick turning, because the masses are going to ride these bikes thinking, oh, well, it's got to do this and got to do that. But then you try to take that same street bike and go on the racetrack. It's such a different world. It's a different world when you're doing 30 or 40 miles an hour in a canyon versus 130, 150 miles an hour on a racetrack, right? The geometry of the bike and the action of the bike is going to be totally different. My job as a tuner, especially for track day people, is to make the bike easier for you to ride fast. And what you think the bike may need on the street is not what it needs on the racetrack. When you talk about like raising the front end up, right? The reason I raise the front end up on most bikes is kind of like thinking about doing a bench press, right? When you're bench pressing and you're all bound up like this, you can't do anything, right? But once you're fully extended, you're further away from the center of gravity. It's easy to move it. Same thing with a front end that's higher, right? You can flop side to side a lot easier versus something that's on its nose and the front tire's behind you. So that's makes it easier for the ride to not be fatigued as they're going around, going through corners or transitions or whatever it may be. But when you do that, generally you do have to do lighter springs. And this is where the whole sag thing goes out the window because, okay, fine. Well, we've raised this front end up, say 30 millimeters, right? Just for a number. Well, a bike will only go into a corner if it can go on its nose. If it can't, if the springs are so stiff and the bike can't go on its nose, the bike's going to run straight. It isn't going to want to get to the apex, or you're going to have to squeeze the brakes so hard to get that thing to turn. But then as soon as you let go of the brake, guess what? The front end does this, and next thing you know it, you're running off in the middle of, the desert. Like I said, asking the rider what they wanted to do, and then if you have, the ability to look at data, and I'll ask the same question like 5 different ways, to make sure the rider is telling me what I want to hear versus what they think I want to hear. Because it's simple physics. A bike's either going to do this or it's going to do that. It's not going to do all of these different things. I mean, it physically cannot do it. It's one or the other. And you have to make the decision of what is this motorcycle doing? What is this front end doing? What is the rear end doing?
I think to the point that you're making where you raise the front end a lot of times when guys start doing track riding. I think there's a misconception that when I go to the track, I need a faster turning, more nimble, quicker handling bike. But I find a lot of times it's the opposite, right? I actually want way more stability because I'm going much faster. I'm leaning over much farther. I actually need a much more stable bike in general, not a fast turning bike.
And the raising the front end of the bike will give you that stability, right?
Yeah.
It gives you more leverage from the part of the tire where it's touching the ground. You're further away from that. So you have more leverage to flop that bike side to side, which makes it easier for you to ride the bike faster. But like I said, you have to, when you do raise the front end up like that, to make the bike turn in easier, yes, you put softer springs in it so it can go on its nose.
Yeah.
Right. Or needs to tighten up a corner. Like on most street rides, you're in a corner. I'm doing it. All of a sudden, the road tightens up. If you're not familiar, well, if you had lighter springs and you just let off the throttle a little bit, the bike can transition where you want it to go. Where if your springs are really, really stiff in the front end, the bike's just going to run wide. The bike's going to just want to basically stand up or not change a line whatsoever. And you're muscling that thing, and most people just get, they get frustrated.